War brings with it many tales of heroism and valor, and some of the most memorable moments in history are born from war. Yet among all of these well-known stories of bravery in history, there are some that slip through the cracks of time and are lost, and only continue to live on as either forgotten tales or urban legends from another time. The history of war is filled with such accounts, and is always a reminder of the horrors of war, and this story is no less than terrifying. Join me, and welcome to Tales from the Den. One terrifying story comes to us from Europe in World War II, where a sinister and spooky series of events would play out in the isolated mountains of Hamlet, located in Switzerland. As the fighting continued onward across Europe, the nation of Switzerland was in a rather unique position. Their neutral stance on the war allowed them to remain a separate entity to the Axis and Allied forces, and they were mostly untouched by the war. But not completely though. Although they kept up strong defenses along their borders as a deterrent and made stances against Germany to hold them back from invading, trade was blockaded by both the Allies and the Axis, and the country was at various points in the war bombed by both sides. In the case of the Allies, it was said to be accidentally, even as it remained independent and mediated between the two. Switzerland was never actually invaded by Germany, and the country made sure to have plans put in place. Aggression from the Axis power steadily increased. The Swiss military, severely outnumbered in men and firepower, evolved their military strategy to retreating into the remote Alps to fortify their positions. Well stocked and fortified in, it was an area where they planned to launch a campaign of attrition and withdrawal should the Germans actually decide to invade. It is in this state of rising tension and looming invasion that our wartime urban legend takes place. The tale comes from a man who says his grandfather was one of the soldiers at the time, and revolves around a company of British military men who he claims were tasked with providing reinforcements for the Swiss forces, and who in the winter of 1943 ended up stationed at a remote mountain village of only around 500 people. It was extremely isolated, with the men unable to establish reliable communications with the Swiss, and also having problems communicating with the locals, as only a few of the men spoke German. The situation was made more complicated and mysterious when a blizzard swept through the region to leave them surrounded by high snowdrifts, blocked roads, essentially trapped out in the middle of nowhere, with their last lines of communication damaged and no contact with the outside world. Despite this new predicament, the troops' captain decided to uphold their mission and defend the village at all costs. As the weeks went on, the winter became worse, and with addition, the location of the village being between two walls of icy mountainous terrain, subjected to avalanches, and that the sunlight only touched upon the area for a mere few hours a day. It was in this atmosphere of freezing cold and half darkness and howling winds that strange things began to happen around the town. Villagers began complaining through a local who acted as a translator. that since the British troops had arrived there, strange things had been happening, including objects going missing from homes, such as blankets and tarps, wood, and other more valuable items. The captain asked his men if any of them had been the ones committing these acts, but they all insisted that none of them had stolen anything, and brushed it off as a local dispute. Although unusual for the small village, it would only get worse, however. When a child went missing, the villagers launched a massive search for the child, but found no trace of him. At first, it was thought that the boy must have just gone out exploring, or even perhaps got lost. But as time passed, and no leads led to anywhere, it was later assumed that the young boy may have had some sort of accident. After all, some of the terrain was rather treacherous, and the winter was harsh. But then as the locals grew in horror and disarray, another child went missing, and then another, and then another, until there were now several missing children altogether. The terrified locals began to think that there was perhaps a wild animal of some sort lurking around the village, or a pack of wolves snatching up the children. As the villagers began to panic and grow terrified, the British troops decided on a solution. The captain arranged regular armed night patrols through the town. Although they did not see anything out of the ordinary during this time, the children continued to disappear without a trace. Until one night, one of the British soldiers disappeared as well. A soldier called Private Reginald vanished right out of the company's barracks. This made the events a lot more ominous, and the superstitious villagers began to think that some supernatural force might have been behind the events, coming down out of the mountains at night. With children, and now a soldier missing, and talk of monsters or wolves lurking in the shadows, the men hunkered down to try and figure out what was going on. Some were convinced that it was just the work of villagers trying to frame the British troops, while others thought it was wolves or some other animal, the unusually harsh winter, or just a case of getting lost in the terrain. They decided to keep their guards up though, even higher, and continue the nightly patrols with their eyes peeled and more vigilant than ever. But even with being on high alert, strangely, even more children disappeared from the village, further pushing rumors amongst the villagers of an evil spirit or something sinister plaguing them. By the time spring began and the deep snow started to thaw, there were a total of 7 children missing, and still no sign of Private Reginald. Then, during one nightly patrol, something strange would happen, and the soldier's grandson, who was recounting the story from his grandfather's words and his journal he left him, would say this: "It was sometime past midnight when my grandpa and his comrades noticed a figure peering through the bedroom window of one of the villagers' houses. My grandpa was on the opposite end of the street, so at first, the figure looking through the window didn't see the patrol. My grandpa and the other soldiers yelled and shouted at the figure, and it immediately fled away from the window and began running. Everyone in the patrol was certain that this is what was behind the disappearances and break-ins. They ran as fast as they could in pursuit, through the melting snow and ice in the dead of night, screaming at whatever it was to stop. They kept running, and soon they found themselves on the outskirts of the village, where the snow was still fairly deep. The figure jumped into the ground. It looked like it had vanished into thin air at first, but as the patrol grew closer, they realized that the figure had actually just jumped into an underground cave that had been hollowed out in the side of the snowdrift. After that, the startled soldiers hesitated to the entrance to the frozen cave to look inside, seeing nothing but darkness below and not knowing who or what was down there. But after a few seconds, they were suddenly met with gunfire and flashes of light erupting from the depths of the cave. The stunned and scared soldiers staggered back, quickly grabbing their weapons. All of them then lined up to the entrance of the cave, shouting and screaming in unison. All of them took aim at the same time and fired down into the cave, emptying their magazines, shooting all around the area blindly, until the returning fire ceased and the air was filled with silence and smoke from the guns. One of the soldiers lowered himself down into the hole, and after a short time, soon came frantically running back out of fear and disgust and horror. The rest of the company, startled by his reaction, asked him what he had seen, and the grandson of the soldier says his grandpa wrote this: "My grandpa took out his flashlight and shined it into the cave when he saw the gruesome explanation behind the strange occurrences in the town. The figure, they called it, that they had been chasing was actually Private Reginald, the private who had gone missing weeks before, and that they had shot Reginald right through the heart. The cave was not only occupied by Reginald, though, but also the bodies of the 7 missing children, who were now partially eaten, either due to stress of being snowed in all winter, living in near constant darkness, or some sort of terrible mental illness. Reginald had gone completely insane, and begun breaking into the villagers' houses and snatching their children from their homes in the middle of the night. He had used a halberd that had been reported missing from one of the homes to dismember the bodies after he slit the children's throats and hid them in the cave." After hearing this, it is hard to know for sure if this story is true or not, considering it only has one source from the grandson and a journal. Nevertheless, there is many tales of men going mad during war, and even stories of cannibalism and murder, so one can only wonder and speculate. That being said though, war brings out the worst in humanity, and can, most often than not, distort the mind. Thanks for watching. Until next time.